My talk is going to be on how in-laws contribute to domestic abuse in South Asian communities in Australia. I've just done my honours thesis on this. I run the Bengal Foundation, which is a support service for South Asian women primarily, and a lot of the women were coming to us with domestic abuse situations, but a lot of the perpetrators weren't their husbands. So I did an honours degree, and then I'm hoping to get into a PhD later on this year to continue the study. So we've all seen Bollywood Weddings. So you can see lots of colour, lots of music, dancing, people, food, all sorts of things, and goes on for days and days, believe me. So this is a bridal hand or an arm with all of her jewellery and her henna, and there's going to be lots of that, and there's going to be lots of embroidered clothes and all sorts of things. And once they go through the various ceremonies, they will come to the actual part of the solemnisation of the wedding, and they will, it will be an emotional time for everybody. So regardless of whether you are a Sikh girl, whether you are a Muslim girl, whether you are a Hindu girl, it won't matter. You will have the same dress, you will have the same traditional days that you will celebrate. The henna will be the same, the clothes will be the same, and you'll just have a different religious ceremony, depending on where you're coming from. So so let me talk about who we're talking about first. So when we talk about the Indian subcontinent, which I don't want to do because it's a colonial thing, I want to talk about South Asian people. South Asian people are primarily the Indian subcontinent, diaspora, in Australia, and it is one of the largest non-white cohorts of people within the country. It's a very old, established community here. They've been here, some of them came out on the first fleet. Remember that the Indian subcontinent was colonised by the British, so when the British came and went to all parts of the world, they took a whole lot of Indians with them. Now those Indians could have been India from modern day India, or they could have been Afghans, they could have been Pakistanis or Sri Lankans or Bhutanese or Nepalese or whatever, but they are all from that area. So all of those sort of people, Bangladesh I missed, and large South Asian communities that are in South Africa, various other parts of Africa, in Fiji, and then they've dispersed to England, Canada, all sorts of places. So it's a very, very big diaspora. When you consider there's 1 billion Indians just in India, consider how big that diaspora is across the world. So what do these people, whether they arrived in Australia yesterday or whether they arrived in Australia a couple of centuries ago, have in common? They have strong family connections, they have strong religious connections, they have strong cultural connections, and they have strong traditional connections. Whether they're newly arrived or whether they've been here for centuries, those connections will still be the same. People who talk about integration or assimilation, these communities don't necessarily do that. They will stick to their traditions. They may assimilate and integrate in lots of other different ways, but their core ethics and values as families and as communities are the same for generations. So now we know who we're talking about. Let's talk about what domestic abuse is, and I'm preaching to the converted. But the United Nations Declaration of Elimination Against Violence, Elimination of Violence Against Women says any act of gender-based violence that causes or could cause physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of harm or coercion in public or in private life. Australian public policy, by our watch, because it's the only person who can find it, has an emphasis on intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual assault of women. 80% of what domestic abuse is that. The other 20% is family violence, which covers the Indigenous community. So we know what all the figures are. According to our watch, we know a woman a week is murdered, 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence, 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence, almost 10 women a day are hospitalised, police are called out every 2 minutes. So we know that. But there is a lack, and this is our watch's words, There is a lack of comprehensive population-wide data on prevalence and impacts of violence against women from migrant and refugee backgrounds. Specific studies suggest high rates and specific issues of complexity. So we don't even have the data. We just don't measure it. We don't have any idea of how many non-white women are affected. We understand the Indigenous women, and there are, those numbers are horrendous, but we don't understand the brown women. So, in-laws as abusers. A study in 2018 in Uttar Pradesh, which is in the top part of India, in patrilocal and patrilineal societies where extended households are common, such as India, household members other than the husband can play a crucial role in determining a woman's level of autonomy and well-being. So this is not even abuse. This is about control. This is about, it's not just the husband that says you can't do this and that, other people in the household. Now, when you consider that a woman from that area, the subcontinental area, those South Asian women, they will primarily move from their father's house to their husband's house. And what happens is that their husband's house has got 15 other people in it, because he lives with his grandma and his mum and dad and his extended brothers and sisters and their wives and children, and there's a lot of people in that household. So a new bride walks in, she's at the bottom of the totem pole. She's not getting any solace or any support from anybody because she's at the bottom and she's got to work her way up. Now, she can have an easy ride to the top, or she can have a pretty bad ride to the top. Besides her husband and mother-in-law, on average, a woman interacts with 1.6 individuals, that's her general peers, and 0.7 individuals about private matters, close peers. Nearly 36% of women have no close peers. Now just think of those numbers. 1.6 individuals, general peers. These are girls that you can ring up and go have a coffee. How many girls can you ring on your phone now and say, hey, meet me at Garden City for coffee? More than 1.6. 0.7 individuals about private matters. So how many of those girlfriends that you've got are the ones that you talk about? The bad marriage, the kids are upsetting me, I've got this medical condition, real personal stuff that you talk about. How many? That's not even one person. How many of those have you got in your phone? How many of those that you can go to? Even if it's your mum, even if it's your sister, these women don't even have that. Nearly 36% of women have nobody outside their house, and more often than not, nobody inside the house either, that they can go and speak to about a personal matter or about anything. They just want to have a whinge or a rant. So my honours thesis was talking to women about their experience around in-law abuse. So I spoke to 11 women. Great, 11 women. But, I mean, it's important. That's how academics work. 11 women is a good case study, Yasmin, they said to me. But anyway, so of those 11 women, 4 women were still in their relationship with their husband and 7 had divorced. All participants were highly educated, with 8 of the 11 having completed university education, and of those 8, 7 had master's degrees or doctorate qualifications. Many participants were encouraged to give up their careers when they got married. One woman said, I was going to do my master's and my child was 3 months old and my in-laws refused to look after her whilst I was at uni, so I had to make a choice. And yet she lived in the same household. She lived in the house. For 12 years she lived in the house with her in-laws, and they wouldn't look after the child. No, that's your responsibility. Many had cut ties with their in-laws. However, one participant who had divorced the husband said, they're very upset with me and they still message me and I don't think I'll ever get rid of them. And yet they're divorced. He's got married again, got another family. And one woman said to me that my mother-in-law was in ICU with COVID last year, and she was still messaging my daughter and said, I'm not finished with her yet. Ties run deep. Vengeance runs deep. So my data from the thesis, most of the women were aged currently at 32 to 56 years of age. They weren't that age when they got married. The relationships lasted some from 18 months up to 20 years. All came from middle to upper class families with stable family backgrounds, with freedom, money, house, education, servants and jobs. These weren't poor women, these weren't homeless women, these weren't uneducated women. So they all came from very, very well-to-do, established backgrounds. Fathers had plenty of money, they had, all the freedoms, they could come and go whenever they want, they all had education, they all had jobs. It didn't matter whether they had an arranged marriage or they had a love marriage, because both sets of women had issues. All women were deeply committed to their faith, but sometimes this was used against them, with one mother-in-law saying, "I am praying to God that you die soon because you took my son." So what sort of abuse were these women exposed to? Physical abuse. She didn't mop the floors properly, she got belted. Isolation. Stay in your room. Somebody came to visit, you stay in your room. Even though the tendency is within those cultures is that if you're the new bride, you come out and you're still dressed in your bridal finery, because you supposedly get a whole trunk full of new clothes. So every day you would get dressed. Somebody's nodding over there because she's a brown woman too. She knows it. You would get dressed up every day and present yourself like, it's very Victorian in that you present yourself to court, because the neighbours would come and see the new bride, or the relatives that couldn't make it to the wedding would come and see the new bride. So you would be all dressed up in the finery. Well, a lot of these women were told to stay in your room. We don't want to introduce you to anybody else. So they were isolated from people within the house, and they were certainly not allowed to go and visit their parents. And some of those parents were in the next suburb. Deprivation of freedom and food. I heard many stories of mother-in-laws getting up first thing in the morning and cooking food for the family, and then locking the kitchen and taking that food into her bedroom. And if you wanted to eat, you would have to go in there and ask her. I heard other stories of women who were told to cook for the family and were given the ingredients. So if it said 2 cloves of garlic, you only got 2 cloves of garlic. And if you wanted to put in 3, well, she'd lock the cupboard. So she would put it all out, and that's all you were getting. So if you stuffed something up or burnt the onions or did something, tough luck. Strict rules in the household. One woman was told on the very next day that she got married, she walked into the lounge, everyone's sitting around, and she said, "Come and sit next to me." And she said, "Oh, that's good, getting on good with mother-in-law." And she told her, she said, "This is the rules, I'm the boss in this house. You can't go here, you can't speak to that person, you can't do that, and you can't go up to the top floor where we have, they have like a balcony, big veranda type thing. Summertime, everybody's up there, they usually sleep out there because they don't have air conditioning. And it's, but because there's high rises that other people have got maybe a 3rd story and they can see down, that woman was never allowed up there. Even if they were having a function, she was not allowed upstairs. In her own house, she couldn't even go there. A lack of privacy. When you're pregnant, if you had a baby yet, when you're pregnant, she's been married for 6 months, she's not pregnant yet. When you can have sex, don't want that. When you have sex and when you are pregnant, it's a girl that's having an abortion. Or just monitoring your sexual deeds or whatever. For Muslim women, you must, after you've had sex, you must have a bath the next morning. That's a religious ritual that you go through. So they knew that if the water was running first thing in the morning, they'd done something the night before. And if you were in a confined house with 1 or 2 bathrooms and there's 16 people in there, they know when the water's running. So everyone then knew what was happening in the bedroom. Constant criticism. "Oh, yeah, I know, we took you, but you're not a doctor like my son is," or your skin's a little bit too dark, and if you put a little bit more makeup on, you can like yourself, or that dress doesn't suit you, it looks better on the sister-in-law because that was her daughter. So constant criticism that they were up against. 8 of the 11 participants had their husbands abuse them, either with the support of their mother-in-law, on behalf of the mother-in-law, or in conjunction with the mother-in-law. So either the mother-in-law was saying, "Yes, that's a very good thing, you're a good husband," or the mother-in-law was saying, "She's a ratbag, you need to straighten her out." So they were abusing her because of that. Or The mother-in-law was abusing her and he was abusing her as well. So how does this happen? Who's got sons? Adult sons? Or even adult children? Adult children. How many times you've got an adult child? A daughter. How often does she ring you? Is she far away?
There's one living at home, the other one will bring me maybe a few times a week. She texts me probably every day.
How often, Betty, how often does your sons ring you? The ones that are away?
Oh, every week at the moment with the small floods, twice a day.
Twice. Okay. This isn't the Lismore floods. But, let's go back. These boys, men, are ringing their mothers every single day, probably 3 times a day. They will get up in the morning, they will go to work. Mom, what happened last night? This and that. I'm going to work now. Yes, I'm catching the bus. Yes, I had breakfast. She's sitting back home, 10,000 miles away. He's reporting back. Oh yeah, we did that, whatever. Yeah, we went shopping yesterday. Yeah, we bought that. And yeah, she bought a pair of shoes, but it was only $20, so that's fine. It wasn't $40. He will report back everything. If he's that way, Mike doesn't got anything. If he's that way inclined, and not only that he will report back, but she will ask. Mother-in-law will be sitting back home and she will be asking those questions. What did you do yesterday? Where did you go today? 6 hours later, he's going to ring back again. Yes, I'm having lunch. What did you make for lunch? What did you do? 8 hours later, he will ring back again. I've arrived home. This is what's happening. Yes, the house is clean. No, it's not clean. She wasn't home when I got home. Whatever. So when you're talking to your kids once a week, once a month, whatever, they're talking about 3 times a day. Control. Keep an eye on her. Her honour is our honour. So if she does something wrong, that's a reflection on us as a family. So we need to keep her under control because she's the newbie in the house. She doesn't know what our family situation is. She doesn't know the respect we have in our own community. She doesn't know the neighbours. So we need to keep an eye on her and control her, because if she does something that's going to be disrespectful or upset somebody, then that's going to be a bad mark against all of us. The reverence of sons, long-held ancient cultural tradition of men being breadwinners. So even women who were working, who are doctors, who are paediatricians, who are heart specialists, still controlled by men. Men refusing to intervene. 6 participants spoke of their father-in-laws being really nice, gentle people, but were mute in front of their wives. They knew what was going on. They saw what was going on. They heard what was going on. Never spoke a word. But nice guys. One girl said to me, she said, when I first got there, she said he was great. We'd have breakfast every morning. And she said, till the mother-in-law and the sister-in-law realised what Dad was doing, never had breakfast with him ever again. Patriarchy, of course. Denise Candiotti said, women maintain the patriarchy to enjoy the benefits when it's their turn. And goes on to say, some women tolerate negative treatment by in-laws when they first marry, expecting that when they assume the mother-in-law role, they will have power over their son's wife. So it's learned behaviour. It's about rising up that totem pole. Although, that may be theoretical, and it's probably true for a lot of them, but the women that I spoke to were hell-bent on making sure that this didn't happen in the second generation. That's it. So where's the justice for these women who are being abused? How does a woman being abused by her mother-in-law get justice? How does she report it? She's being abused constantly. She's being monitored. Her phone calls are being listened to. Her, movements are being watched. She's probably got CCTV cameras. I've got the police called me out one day and said, "Can you go and see this woman?" Sri Lankan background, had hardwired CCTV cameras in her house. And as her husband left to go to work, he couldn't monitor her, so the in-laws were sitting back home in Sri Lanka and watching everything. And she couldn't hear her, but knew that if somebody rang her, she picked up the phone. So 11 o'clock, phone call came. So when he came home, he asked who was on the phone at 11 o'clock. So when she rings, who does she ring? Does she ring the police and say, I'm being abused? What are the police? Oh, my mother-in-law's abusing me. Yeah, right. You're going to get laughed out of the room. But not only that, the mother-in-law's not even here. So how is that information being received? It's not even something that even crosses your radar to think, oh, my mother-in-law's being abused. Well, tell her to leave, or tell her to go, or don't talk to her, or whatever. but the ties that bind are very difficult to break. What if she's not even in the country? How do you fill out a DBO form against her? She's not even here.
Yeah.
It's never going to get anywhere. What if a mother-in-law is visiting? That's the other problem. She's visiting. She's here for 2 or 3 months because she's got a tourist visa or whatever. He's applied for her to come out. She's visiting, making the woman's life hell, absolute hell, and I've had them in tears. And you know, I can speak to you at 8:30 when I drop my kids off at school, but I've got to be back by 8:45 because mother-in-law's watching the clock and she'll want to know where I've been if it's 17 minutes, not 15 minutes. What if she's visiting, and what does she do in that situation? And I had one classic case that mother-in-law was visiting. She arrived on Monday. Tuesday morning, husband came to her, 10 years married, 3 children, just bought $1 million house down on the south side. Husband came to her the very next day after mother-in-law arrived and said, I want a divorce. Had never been spoken about before within that relationship. Till mother-in-law arrived and said, oh yeah, I can take you back to India and get married again. No problems. So what I said to her then, after we'd been talking for about a week, and that's by the Friday she got really frustrated, and in fact, the only time that she could meet me was on her way home from work, because that was the only time that she wasn't monitored. She said, if I get home and came back out to see you, I wouldn't be able to leave the house. So I need to do it on the way to work. And I said, I was in the city at the time. And I said, well, I'm going to be a couple of hours yet. She said, I'll sit here and wait. So she just stood up, she just parked outside somebody's house and said, I'm just sitting here waiting. And I had to go, and I said, give me the address where you are. And I went and sat, and she came and sat in my car. She just sat in my car and just burst into tears. So I said to her, we go and put a DBO in against mother-in-law. Surely, I couldn't work out what we could do. But anyway, I said, surely we could go and do that. So Friday afternoon, she goes down to Holland Park Court, fills in the paperwork, comes back and says, well, I've just put in a DBO against mother-in-law. Sunday morning, mother-in-law's packed bags and gone. She's still being abused. The perpetrator's gone. Where's the justice? How does she cope with an abusive partner and an abusive mother-in-law in the background? So it's double-barrel abuse coming. And if the partner is abusive and she puts a DBO in against him, and the police come and they take him away, am I running out of time? They take him away, everything's all right, that's fine. She's still got a mother-in-law that she's living with. Oh, you're a bad wife. Where's my son gone? You're bad. So the abuse hasn't stopped, it's just changed. It's moved from the partner to the mother-in-law. So what do we do? And it's not in the writing, it's in the delivery. So what do we do, as in, what do we as women in Australia, or legislators in Australia, or governments in Australia, we know, we've heard about this issue, so what do we as Australians do? Well, this is the white saviour complex. Let's look at dowry abuse. Of course, that's an ancient tradition that we've just got to scrub that out because that's so terrible. And we've introduced this dowry abuse as a factor in DV legislation. And not one of the women that I've spoken to, or not hundreds of women that I have helped over the last however many years, has ever spoken about dowry abuse as being a problem of domestic abuse, or has been a cause of domestic abuse, or has been, it may be, number 16 on the list of reasons, but it's never been primary. Never. So then we look at forced marriage. Oh, we've got, look, child marriage is abhorrent, absolutely. But 12-year-olds are having sex today, for God's sake. They're just not married. So, but, 12-year-olds in Afghanistan or Yemen or whatever, and it's shit too, I agree. Look, I'm not here to advocate for child marriage. What I'm saying is, white people are doing it every day, but when it comes to the white saviour complex, we've got to go and protect the brown women, because that's just horrible what they do to their young girls. My mother was married at 14. You go back a generation or two, women were married under 16. So child marriage isn't that foreign necessarily, but it is foreign when it's brown women, because that's just a bad thing. So that's what we do to protect brown women. Well, what do we need to do? Understand that domestic abuse is more than intimate partner violence. Allow women to tell their stories and to listen to them, and understand that multiculturalism isn't just about dressing up and enjoying the food and having a good time and, get a photo opportunity. Have some punitive measures in place to punish overseas-based perpetrators. And it could be just as simple as, if you are proven to be an overseas-based perpetrator, you can't come to Australia. Simple. That'll stop it real quick, because they all want to get their 3-month visa to get out of here. Have funded, culturally appropriate service providers that can understand the issues. That's self-indulgent, because that's me. We're not funded, so we're voluntary. Understand the barriers that migrant women have to even discuss domestic abuse, let alone report it. Remember the 1.6, the 1.7? They had nobody to speak to. I had a woman, double PhD, sat in my office a month ago in tears, telling me about 20 years of abuse that she's got from her husband, and never spoke to anybody, not even her mother, not even her sister. Double PhD, this is not a dumb woman. She is a senior lecturer at one of the universities, and had not discussed what she was going through. So those barriers, the idea of shame, the idea of honour, the idea of respect, these women aren't going to go and tell anybody. They're not going to go and sit in front of a male constable or sergeant or whatever and say, oh, this is what happened to me. Talk about marital rape, for God's sake. There's not even a word in the Hindi language for rape. Widen the understanding and definition of what domestic abuse is. Understand that cultures that live in generational households will have more than one perpetrator, and that removing one is not removing